The elevator in the Ashford Tower had been broken for 11 days, and nobody in the building seemed to mind less than the 6-year-old boy in the blue coat who insisted, every single afternoon, on taking the stairs instead. What none of the residents knew, what even his father did not fully understand yet, was that the boy was not avoiding the elevator. He was avoiding the silence inside it. And the only person in that building who seemed to notice the difference was a 71-year-old doorman named Walter, who had worked the lobby of that building for 19 years and who nobody, until recently, had thought to really look at. David Reyes had built a logistics empire worth 11 figures by the time he was 44, and he had done it by never missing a detail. He read every contract twice. He remembered the names of shipping managers in cities he had visited only once. He was, by every professional measure, a man who saw things. But for the 7 months since his wife Elena had died, an aneurysm, sudden, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while she was making coffee, David had stopped seeing almost everything that mattered. He saw spreadsheets. He saw quarterly targets. He did not see that his son Milo had stopped speaking about his mother entirely, not because he had forgotten her, but because every time he tried, his father's face did something that frightened him. A kind of closing, like a door being shut gently but firmly from the other side. David told himself Milo was resilient. Children were resilient. He had read that somewhere, in an article he skimmed at 30,000 feet between meetings in Singapore and Frankfurt. He told himself the nanny had things handled. He told himself a great many things that autumn, and all of them were designed to keep him from sitting still long enough to feel what was underneath them. What he did not know, what he would not learn for another 3 weeks, was that every day at 3:40 in the afternoon, when the nanny signed Milo out of school and walked him the 4 blocks home, his son was not going straight up to the apartment. He was stopping in the lobby. He was finding Walter. Walter Odom had a face like a folded map, lined in ways that suggested he had been somewhere and back more than once. He wore the same Navy building uniform every day, pressed by his own hand at a laundromat 2 subway stops from his apartment in Queens, because the dry cleaner near the tower charged $11 a shirt and Walter's pension from his years as a transit maintenance supervisor did not stretch that far, not with his rent, not anymore. He had worked the door of the Ashford for 19 years. In that time, he had signed for 10,000 packages, hailed several thousand cabs, and been addressed by his first name by perhaps a dozen residents. Most called him the Doorman when they called him anything at all. He did not resent it. He had made a private peace with invisibility a long time ago, for reasons that had nothing to do with his job. What residents saw when they saw him, a quiet older man who held doors and said good morning. What they did not see, what nobody had cared to ask, was that Walter had once had a daughter named Renee, and that Renee had died at 19, 9 years ago, in a car accident on a wet road outside Albany, and that Walter had spent the better part of a decade learning, the hard way, alone, in an apartment that still had a box of her things he had never opened, what grief actually required of a person. Not speeches, not advice, just presence, offered without asking anything back. So when a small boy in a blue coat began sitting on the bench by the mailboxes every afternoon, saying almost nothing, watching Walter work with the careful, cataloging eyes of a child looking for someone who would not flinch, Walter recognized something. He did not say anything about it at first. He simply left space. On the first day, Milo said nothing for 20 minutes and then asked Walter if he had a mom. Walter said yes, once, a long time ago, and that she had passed. Milo asked if it made him sad. Walter said it still did, some days, even after a long time, and that this was allowed. Milo nodded like he had been given a very important piece of information, and did not bring it up again for 3 days. By the second week, Milo was bringing drawings. Crayon renderings of a woman with yellow hair standing next to a dog they did not own, of a kitchen with 3 stick figures and one who was smaller, of things Milo could not yet say out loud but could, apparently, draw. Walter kept every one of them in the top drawer of the doorman's podium, in a folder he had started calling, privately, Milo's Gallery. Before we continue, if you believe that grief has no rank and comfort wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to Kindness Tales, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. It was a Thursday in November when David came home early. A meeting had ended ahead of schedule, a rarity, and walked into his own lobby to find his son sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the doorman's station, sorting a stack of drawings into 2 piles while Walter crouched beside him with the unhurried attention of a man with nowhere else more important to be. "What is this?" David said, and it came out sharper than he intended, edged with something that was not quite anger but lived close to it. Milo startled and stood up fast, the drawings scattering. Walter rose slowly, the way a man's knees make him rise slowly at 71, and said, "Mr. Reyes." Milo and I were just. "He has a nanny for this," David said. "He has homework. He shouldn't be sitting on the floor of a lobby." He heard himself say it, and some small, still functioning part of him recognized that he did not actually know what this was, that he was reacting to a feeling he could not name rather than to anything Walter had done. But the feeling was loud, and it was easier to aim it outward than to ask what it was. Walter did not defend himself immediately. He bent down, gathered the scattered drawings with careful hands, and set them gently on the podium. Then he said, quietly, not as a challenge but as a fact laid down between them, "He talks to me about his mother, sir. I don't believe he talks to anyone else about her." The lobby went very still. Milo had gone silent in the particular way David had learned, without letting himself examine it, meant his son was bracing for something. David said, "That's not your place to know." "No," Walter said, "it isn't, but he told me anyway, and I didn't think it was my place to turn him away." David almost said something else, something about boundaries, about professionalism, about a doorman's job description not including a 6-year-old's grief. And it sat right at the back of his throat, fully formed, ready. He did not say it. He looked down instead at the top drawing on the pile Walter had gathered, and saw a woman with yellow hair, and beneath her, in Milo's careful uneven printing, one word, Mom. He had not seen his son write that word since the funeral. That night David did not sleep. He sat in his study with the light off, holding a glass he never drank from, and did something he had been avoiding for 7 months, which was to actually think about what his son's days looked like without him in them. He thought about the nanny's efficient reports, fed, bathed, homework complete, and how none of them had ever once mentioned that his son had stopped mentioning his mother's name at home. He thought about how he had told himself Milo was resilient, and how what he had actually meant was that Milo was quiet, and that he had mistaken the second thing for the first because it required nothing further of him. The next afternoon, David came down to the lobby at 3:40, which he had never once done in 19 years of Walter's employment. He found the bench by the mailboxes and sat down on it, in his suit, and waited. Milo arrived at 3:41, saw his father sitting where he usually sat, and stopped in the doorway with a wary, assessing stillness of a child unsure whether the ground was safe. Walter, behind the podium, said nothing, but his eyes moved to David with something that was not quite a question and not quite approval. Something more like watching, the way you watch to see if a thing will hold weight before you trust it. David patted the bench beside him. Milo came, slowly, and sat at the far end, leaving a full cushion of distance between them. "I heard you talk to Walter about Mom," David said. His voice did not do the closing thing this time. He made sure of it, the way you make sure of your footing on ice. Milo looked at his shoes. "You get a weird face when I talk about her." David felt that land somewhere under his ribs. "I know I do," he said. "I didn't know you could see it." "Everyone can see it," Milo said, with the brutal, uncomplicated honesty only children still have full access to. David was quiet for a long moment. Walter, at the podium, kept his eyes down on a delivery log, giving them the only privacy a lobby could offer. Finally David said, "Tell me something about her. Anything. I want to hear it." Milo considered this with visible suspicion, as though checking the offer for a trap. Then he said, "She used to let me put too much syrup on pancakes." "More than you let me." "She did," David said, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 7 months loosened by perhaps 1 degree. "She always said the syrup was the point." Milo almost smiled. Almost. David decided, right there on the bench, that almost was enough to build on. He looked up at Walter. "How long has this been going on?" "The two of you." "Since September, sir," Walter said. "Around the time school started back." "Why didn't you say something to me?" Walter set down his pen. "Because it wasn't my job to tell a father how to grieve, or how to raise his son through it. It was my job to hold a door. I just decided that some days, holding the door meant something a little wider than the one at the front of this building." David sat with that. Then he asked the question that had been sitting underneath everything else since the drawing with Mom written beneath it. "Why him? Why did he come to you, out of everyone in this building?" Walter was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. "I lost a daughter," he said. 9 years ago. Renee. She was 19. He said it plainly, without asking for anything in return for the saying of it, which was, David would understand much later, exactly the skill that had made Milo trust him. "I know what it looks like when a person is carrying something too heavy to put down and doesn't yet have the words for it. Your son has the words. He just needed somewhere safe to say them where nobody's face would close." David did not know what to say to that, so for once he did not try to say anything. He simply sat on the bench with his son, in a lobby he had walked through 5,000 times without once stopping, and let the silence be an ordinary, survivable thing rather than a wall. 2 weeks later, David asked Walter to have lunch with him, not in the lobby, not standing, but sitting down, at the small diner on the corner Walter had eaten at for 19 years and David had never once entered. Over coffee, David told him he had arranged, quietly, for Milo to start seeing a child grief counselor twice a week, and that he had started going to a session of his own on the weeks in between. He told Walter this was, in no small part, because of him. Walter said he was glad, and meant it, and did not make a show of the meaning. Then David did something else. He had learned, in the way one learns things when one finally starts paying attention, that Walter took 2 buses each way to get to the Ashford from Queens, that his knees ached badly in winter, and that his pension did not stretch to a car. David did not offer money outright. He understood, by then, that this was not a man who wanted to be fixed, only seen. Instead, he asked Walter, plainly, what would actually help. Walter, after a long pause, admitted that a transfer to the tower's day shift, and coverage that didn't require standing 8 hours straight on a bad hip, would change his life more than anything else could. David made the call that afternoon. It was not charity, it was correction, the kind due to a man who had been doing more than his job for years without anyone thinking to notice or repay it. Milo still stops in the lobby some afternoons. He still draws. The gallery in the top drawer has grown past one folder into two. But now, some days, his father comes down and sits beside him, and Walter pulls up a second chair, and the three of them sit together in a lobby that used to be a place people passed through without looking at each other, and has become, slowly, something closer to a room where a boy learned it was safe to miss his mother out loud. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Kindness Tales for more stories of courage, grace, and the small human moments that change everything. And tell us in the comments, who was the quiet person in your life who taught you it was safe to grieve?